Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling Executive Order 14147. It's a direct instruction from the President to the Executive Branch.
That's right. This specific one is titled Ending the Weaponization of the Federal Government, and it was signed January 20th, 2025 by President Trump.
Okay, so think of this as our shortcut to understanding what could be a pretty significant piece of policy.
Exactly. Our mission today is really to get under the hood of this order. What's its core aim? What are the key parts, the nuts and bolts?
And crucially, what could the ripple effects be? How might it change how government operates?
We'll be sticking just to the order itself and related facts, trying to keep our exploration grounded and neutral.
Okay, let's dive right in then. Section 1, the purpose. It spells it out pretty directly, doesn't it?
It really does. It starts with the president's assertion that the previous administration ran what it calls a systematic campaign against its political opponents.
And the language here is, well, it's quite something. It talks about weaponizing the legal force of federal agencies.
Yeah, law enforcement agencies and the intelligence community specifically, through investigations, prosecutions, civil enforcement actions, that sort of thing.
The underlying concern stated in the order seems to be that these actions weren't really about justice.
Right, but more about politics. Inflicting political pain, as the order puts it, rather than pursuing legitimate government goals.
Okay, so to make that clear, it actually gives some examples of what it's talking about.
It does. It points to activities directed at parents protesting at school board meetings and actions against Americans who spoke out against the previous administration.
And then there's a more general reference to other Americans who were supposedly just, exercising their constitutional rights.
As you listen to this, you might be thinking about that line, where does legitimate government oversight end and something more targeted begin? That seems to be the core issue raised here.
There's also a particularly forceful phrase in this section. It calls the previous administration's actions an unprecedented third world weaponization of prosecutorial power.
That is very strong language, and it connects that directly to an alleged goal of upending the democratic process.
Wow. Okay. And it goes on.
It does. It alleges that individuals who disagreed with prior policies faced federal investigations.
Okay.
And also politically motivated revocations of funding, which the order claims led to some Americans losing access to important services.
And there's a very specific, almost startling claim in there too, isn't there? About a meme.
Yes, it asserts the Department of Justice jailed someone for posting a political meme. And it also draws a sharp contrast. It compares the prosecution of individuals tied to January 6th with what it claims was the near total dropping of cases against BLM rioters.
So if you put all that together, the main driver behind this executive order 14147 seems to be this deep concern or assertion that federal power was improperly used against political adversaries.
Exactly. And the stated goal right there in Section 1 is to ensure accountability for this alleged weaponization.
Okay, so that sets the stage. That brings us to Section 2, which is about the actual policy.
Right. This part is shorter. It lays out the official policy of the United States in response to those concerns.
And what is that policy, basically?
It's stated pretty concisely. The policy is to identify and take appropriate action to correct past misconduct by the federal government related to this alleged weaponization.
Misconduct in both law enforcement and the intelligence community.
Correct. So Section 1 says, here's the problem. Section 2 says, we need to fix it.
Which naturally leads to Section 3, ending the weaponization. This is the how, right? The action plan.
Precisely. This section details the specific steps, and it tasks two key figures with conducting reviews.
Who's first?
Subsection A directs the Attorney General. The AG is told to review the activities of, well, basically all departments and agencies with civil or criminal enforcement authority.
Over what time frame?
Over the last 4 years preceding the order.
And it names some specific agencies.
It does, yeah. It specifically flags the Department of Justice, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, as examples.
That's interesting. DOJ, SEC, FTC. Those are agencies whose work can often intersect with politics, aren't they?
They certainly can. It suggests a potential focus area for this review. And, as you're listening, you might wonder how they'll actually do this review. What criteria will they use?
Especially for that phrase, contrary to the purposes and policies of this order. That sounds a bit subjective.
It does seem open to interpretation, yes. After the review, the AG has to write a report for the president.
Okay.
It goes via the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and the Council to the President, and it needs to include recommendations for remedial actions. how to fix any problems they find.
Got it. So that's the AG's task. What's the other part of Section 3?
Subsection B gives a similar job to the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI.
For the intelligence community.
Exactly. The DNI needs to review the activities of the entire intelligence community, again, over that same 4-year period.
An intelligence community is a defined term, right? It's not just the CIA.
Right. It's defined by law, Section 3003 of Title 50 U.S. Code. It includes a whole range of agencies involved in intelligence, like the CIA, FBI, NSA, parts of the military. It's broad.
So a wide scope for the DNI's review as well.
Definitely. And like the AG, the DNI is looking for instances where conduct appears contrary to the purposes and policies of this order.
And they also have to write a report.
Yes, a report to the president submitted via the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy again, but this time also the National Security Advisor. And it also needs recommendations for corrective actions.
So parallel reviews.
Right.
One for law enforcement and regulatory agencies, one for intelligence.
That's the structure set up here.
Okay, what else is in Section 3?
There's subsection C, which deals with document retention, keeping records.
Ah, important.
Very. It directs all departments and agencies to comply with existing document retention policies and their legal obligations.
And if they don't?
Instances of non-compliance are to be referred to the Attorney General. So for you trying to understand government accountability, this focus on records is key. No records, hard to know what happened.
Makes sense.
Oh.
All right, that covers the main action items. What about Section 4, general provisions? Is this just standard boilerplate?
Mostly, yes. It contains some important clarifications and limitations. Subsection A says the order doesn't impair or affect the existing legal authority of agencies or their heads.
Okay.
And it also specifically says it doesn't mess with the OMB director's functions related to budgets or legislative proposals. Standard stuff to avoid stepping on toes.
Right, what's next?
Subsection B is another common clause. The order must be implemented consistent with applicable law and subject to the availability of appropriations.
Meaning it has to follow existing laws, and Congress needs to provide any necessary funding.
Exactly. Executive orders don't exist in a vacuum.
And subsection C?
Also pretty standard. It states the order doesn't create any new legal rights or benefits that someone could sue over.
So you couldn't use this specific order as the basis for a lawsuit against the government?
Generally, no. It's not intended to create new enforceable rights for individuals.
Okay, that covers the text of the order itself. Let's add a little context. You mentioned the signing date, Jan 20, 2025. When was it official?
It was published in the Federal Register on January 28, 2025. That's the official government journal where these things are formally recorded. Document number 2025-01900, if you're looking it up.
And is that the end of the story for EO 14147?
Well, possibly not. Here's something interesting. The Federal Register entry for this order includes notes mentioning several later executive orders from March and April 2025 EOs, 1VC-230, 14237, 14246, and 14263.
What do the notes say?
They just indicate these later orders have provisions related to EO 142147. It suggests there might have been follow-up actions, maybe adjustments or clarifications to how this initial order was being implemented. Something was still happening related to it a few months later.
That is interesting. Worth keeping an eye on. What about, say, how it's described more broadly, like on Wikipedia?
Wikipedia identifies it as EO 14147, yes. And it summarizes it pretty much as we've discussed, directing agency heads to look for past politically motivated conduct and recommend accountability measures. It also specifically highlights the focus on DOJ, SEC, and FTC, just like the order itself does.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've explored Executive Order 14147. Its stated purpose is addressing alleged past weaponization of federal power against political opponents.
Right. It sets up these reviews by the Attorney General and the DNI covering the previous 4 years, looking for conduct fitting that description and asking for recommendations.
And it includes those standard legal guardrails, not changing existing authority, needing appropriations, not creating new rights to sue.
That covers the main points, yes.
So, thinking about this for you, our listener, considering the sheer scope of these reviews and also the inherent difficulty in defining political motivation in government actions, it does raise some big questions, doesn't it?
Absolutely. What are the practical challenges here? How do you implement this effectively?
And maybe more fundamentally, how do you ensure that this whole process, designed to ensure accountability, doesn't itself get seen as politically motivated?
That's the tightrope, isn't it? You're trying to balance government accountability with maintaining the necessary independence of law enforcement and intelligence agencies.
How do you investigate the past without chilling future actions or making agencies overly cautious about legitimate work that might look political to someone.
It's a tough balance. Ultimately, this executive order really throws a spotlight on some fundamental issues. The role of politics in agency operations, how we do oversight, how we ensure accountability.
Yeah, it's definitely complex, and those later executive orders you mentioned suggest this is probably a story that continued to develop after this initial order was signed. Lots to think about there.